Hello there friends, welcome back to another episode of Generation Tech. My name is Alan. So the Bad Batch, the Clone Wars, the Tales of the Empire, it's all over. Which means now we have a better look at what happened to the galaxy during the crucial transitional period between the Galactic Republic and the Empire. And one of the most crazy things is just how fast the clone troopers go from being the pride of the Galactic Republic armed forces to being pushed out of the military, or worse, in some cases, forced to basically degrade in the face of enemy contact with no support. I mean, you guys remember the clone trooper Mayday, right? He was a clone commander, literally the highest rank a clone could reach in the Grand Army of the Republic. Clone commanders usually led an entire regiment, which is around 2,000 troops. By the time Crosshair reaches his outpost, Mayday only has 2 men left. Of course, not every unit was treated in the same way. Commander Cody was still given his choice in teams for missions against Separatist holdouts until he basically defected, so I'm not sure if clone commanders will still be given as much free reign. And then we have Commander Wolf, whose job is to search for rogue clone groups. But after letting Rex's clone underground go, it seems like his time might be limited as well in the Empire. Yeah, so if these are best case scenarios, these clones at least get to keep their weapons, their ranks, their identity as soldiers. You can imagine how bad it gets for the clones who aren't as lucky. Now, we do know that one unit of clones will fare the best during this transitional period, and that is the 501st Battalion. And that is primarily because their Jedi General Anakin Skywalker is still alive and well. Well, alive at least. And as Palpatine's new enforcer, he was given the choice to keep his old unit. And so just as he did during the Clone Wars, Anakin will continue to offer a degree of protection over his clone troopers, something that his men will appreciate. Today, I want to piece together what exactly happens to the 501st Battalion during its transition into 501st Legion, which in a lot of ways is a completely different unit. So let's first be clear, the naming convention here. The 501st during the Clone Wars was an elite assault battalion, sent to the worst trouble spots in the Clone Wars, but it was actually a lot smaller of a unit than you would actually think. The GAR guideline states that the average battalion has roughly around 576 men, and that is broken up further into 4 companies of 144 soldiers. This is if the unit is at full strength, which it rarely was during the war. I wonder if they had an easy company, because the 501st was basically hopping around to all of the major battles of the Clone Wars. Anyway, this is why the unit's second in command, Rex, is a captain. Captains generally lead battalion-sized units, not clone commanders. Although, according to the lore, the 501st did have a clone commander somewhere in the background. We don't really get to see him. Now, being an elite unit, Captain Rex was granted authority to recruit clones from other units into the 501st. That's what happened to Echo and Fives after the Rishi Moon incident.
If it weren't for you, the Republic wouldn't have learned of the Separatist invasion until it was too late. You showed me something today. You're exactly the kind of men I need in the 501st.
This is probably a very important part of Rex's job, to find replacements for the 501st's casualties. Being a vanguard unit led by an extremely powerful and courageous general meant that this unit suffered heavy casualties in almost every engagement. We mentioned Easy Company, the famous unit of paratroopers in the 101st Airborne that was covered in the HBO series Band of Brothers, one of my favorite shows. I'm sure a lot of you guys, if you enjoyed the Clone Wars, you probably also watched that. These guys in real life went from Operation Overlord to Operation Market Garden to the Battle of Bulge and eventually helped retake Germany. This unit started out the war with roughly 140 men being trained under the legendary prick Herbert Sobel, who shaped them into one of the finest fighting forces in the airborne. But even then, after 3 years of heavy fighting against near-peer enemies, no matter how hard Easy Company trained, they still had up to 400 men going through the unit, coming in different waves as replacement soldiers to fill out decimated platoons. This means that Easy Company probably had a casualty rate of well over 100% throughout the course of the conflict. Of course, some of the core guys will make it, but a lot of replacements fighters would basically last one battle, get wounded, and see their way out. And most combat units are going to be like this. They will fluctuate in size, see a lot of turnover. But for this unit to be combat effective, you really do need your core NCO group and, veteran enlisted men to make things happen. But this is really just the sad truth of attrition. These units never stay intact. And the same thing happens for the 501st. You have Echo and Fives joining in one wave, and then you have Dogma and Tup's generation who join during the Battle of Umbara. Imagine that's your first taste of the Clone Wars. Damn. Now, we don't have concrete casualty rates for the 501st, but like Easy Company, they also fought in a war for roughly 3 years against the near-peer adversaries, and so I imagine casualty numbers had to be really high. Now, what gives a sense of continuity with the 501st Battalion is its core members of the unit. Captain Rex, Fives, Echo, Jesse, Kix, Hardcase, just to name a few. I mean, we were lucky enough to have several 501st focus arcs so that we actually were introduced to these guys and like kind of grew attached to them, and then we would see their journey throughout the war, which is really cool. But most of the time we weren't actually looking at the entire 501st Battalion. We were probably just looking at one company or even platoon. And at least in the earlier years of the war, when some of the boys went down, there always seemed to be enough familiar faces to make the 501st seem like the unit we all fell in love with in those early seasons of the Clone Wars. Although as the war goes on, it's sad to say that those faces also start to disappear. And then at the end of the Outer Rim sieges, the 501st is reorganized. You see Bo-Katan and Ahsoka Tano try to get support from Anakin Skywalker for an assault on Mandalore. But as the plan is being made, the Battle of Coruscant begins, forcing the 501st to return back to the core of the galaxy.
I'll divide the 501st, make a new division under Ahsoka's command.
So this is actually really confusing for me because a battalion is much smaller than a division. Generally speaking, if your military force is not getting its ass handed, you should have 10 battalions in each division. And so how could the 501st be split into something larger? Well, my initial theory was that the 501st started out the war as a battalion, but as Emperor or Chancellor Palpatine and the military leadership saw just how effective Anakin was in combat, they started increasing the size of the 501st until it ballooned into a much larger unit that was no longer a battalion. But then I took a look at the lore and I realized that division in Star Wars doesn't exactly mean the same thing as it does in, I guess, real life. The numbers for a division can be much smaller than a battalion. For instance, the 212th Attack Battalion under Kenobi had the 212th Recon Division, which was a smaller recon unit. And so we'll see that the 501st is split into the 332nd Division and another unit close to its size. In this case, I guess division literally just means division. You know, Star Wars is full of kind of wonky stuff like that. For instance, Jan Dodonna, the head of one of the largest Rebel Navy fleets, is given the title General instead of Admiral. But that's fine, this is Star Wars, not Milsim. The 332nd would take part in the Siege of Mandalore, which was mostly a successful operation. This part of the division would be led by the newly promoted Captain Rex, who actually ends his career as a clone commander. It's just, you don't get any additional benefits. I mean, it's just for honor at this point. Unfortunately, the 332nd Division would be posted on the Venator-class Star Destroyer Tribunal during Order 66, and as Maul and Ahsoka attempt to escape execution, the entire vessel is brought down, killing what remained of the familiar faces in the 501st. I guess the silver lining here is we never have to see our favorite clones fighting for the Empire, you know, and we never have to see them get corrupted in that way. But in many ways, I believe that Dave Filoni purposely split up the 501st Battalion and destroyed them to signal the end of an era and the start of something different. And seeing as Filoni was the one who brought us everything from the Clone Cadet episodes to the Rookie episodes, Umbara, Rinko Vinda, all of the other individual tales featuring the 501st clones, I guess he has every right to do this. My guess he also doesn't want to see his beloved 501st fall into the hands of the Empire. I just wish someone had told that to Jesse and the gang before it happened, but you know, The other half of the 501st Legion would end up on Coruscant, with their commander Anakin Skywalker, and another element was actually deployed to Kashyyyk as well to assist Yoda, the 41st Elite Corps, in the defense of Kharkos City from the Separatist Alliance. Now in Legends, the 501st actually had flight simulator training, and in order to make up for the lack of starfighter pilots, the 501st were actually deployed during the Battle of Coruscant as fighter pilots. Although I believe in the canon version, the 501st is probably going to be fighting the ground battle. Although there was that incident where, you know, like Fives and Hardcase, they stole those Umbaran starfighters and took out that command ship. That was pretty impressive. So they definitely have the ability to do that if they want to. But anyway, this part of the canon isn't really clear. Outside of this Clone Wars 2003 series, we don't actually witness any of the ground engagements, of which there were many during the Battle of Coruscant. I imagine the visual effect budgets and computing powers of yesterday were not enough to generate such a chaotic scene, but come on guys, we have the ability now. I want to see ground battle of Battle of Coruscant. Now, what is clear is that after Order 66 is carried out, the 501st would march alongside Anakin Skywalker directly into the Great Halls of the Jedi Temple and carry out one of the most devastating blows to the Jedi Order during Order 66. This is known as Operation Nightfall. The same tenacity and aggressiveness that Anakin taught the clone troopers made them very capable at killing Jedi. Also, the 501st had a little practice just a few months earlier thanks to General Pong Krell turning against everyone. Anakin would actually promote Clone Sergeant Appo to Clone Commander, and he would take reins of the 501st Legion. But he would also quickly get wounded by George Lucas' son during Order 66. Now this would be the beginning of the 501st Legion. Yes, Legion, just like the Roman Empire. This was a much larger unit, roughly around 10,000 strong. So how do we get from a few hundred troops to thousands of soldiers? Well, just months after the end of the Clone Wars, Vice Admiral Rampart's fleet destroys the cloning facilities on Kamino, which means the young clones that the Bad Batch save in the 3rd season are basically the last batch. There's a show name for you. This means the 501st Legion probably had to be built up in size from the core unit of clones who survived Operation Nightfall, which honestly couldn't be more than 1,000, given what we know about the size of the original battalion. And so this means they are going to have to bolster their ranks with either conscripted or volunteer soldiers, normal non-clone Imperial citizens. I also believe that after Anakin Skywalker suffered a series of setbacks on Mustafar and was recovering from his injuries, the 501st was also being reconstituted. So they weren't being deployed, they were probably just garrisoned on Coruscant, pulling security. And so instead of being deployed like Commander Wolf or Commander Cody, the 501st was probably just sitting around, not doing much at all, just waiting for Vader to wake up. In Legends, we know that Vader took the remnants of the Republic Special Forces operations and rolled them into the 501st. You actually had a lot of clone commandos join the 501st as special, like, Jedi hunting units. Although with the new canon, it does seem like most of the clone commandos were assigned advisor and training roles for the TK troopers, so this just might be it for them. There are a few truths we can kind of pick out from this. One is that probably by the time the 501st Legion is at full strength, only like 5 to 10% of the unit is going to be clones. Now these clones are going to form like the core group and heart of this unit. They're going to have the most experience, the most clout. But again, that's going to slowly fade away because there are going to be no more clones. And as we see, there's just general disdain for clones within the Empire, and that's partially due to the PR campaign waged by Emperor Palpatine's Compnor political movement. During the Clone Wars, the clones were selling bonds, but by the time of the destruction of Kamino, the clones were seen as dumb and droid-like and easy to manipulate. Of course, we had some individuals like Commandant Brendel Hux, creator of the First Order Stormtrooper Corps, who had immense respect for the clones, but for the most part, the clones were seen as obsolete. Throw in the fact that clones age twice as fast as regular human beings, and you'll start to see the problems that the clones faced. Also, remember, Darth Vader was not Anakin anymore, or at least his leadership skills changed a bit. He no longer had that same compassion and care as a commander for his men. Even if he was beloved, or at least feared and respected by his troops, but this was more because he was a really good leader and a terrific fighter, and not because he cared a lot about his men or their safety. He was more than willing to use his men to achieve his goals, and he was also more than willing to dispose of them if they crossed the line. Now, in Legends, it does seem like Vader liked being in the company of clone troopers in the 501st, and even addresses some of the concerns they have about their future. Although now it just seems like this is all just a pipe dream, with so many of these key characters dead and gone. And when the Kenobi series came out, we were all pretty horrified and saddened to see a homeless clone veteran sitting on the sidewalk begging for spare change on Daiyu. It turns out this clone was named Nax, and he was a member of the 501st. You can tell by the blue stripe on his armor. Apparently, Nax suffered a shrapnel wound to his leg, and he was basically judged unfit for combat, and he had nothing else in his life, so he became homeless. This is the cold truth of the Empire. The individual soldier's life was cheap and easily replaced by hordes of starving and jobless Outer Rim citizens. There's no special treatment for the clones, no retirement plan. If you were injured on the job or deemed to be too slow, you were just axed with minimal compensation. We see Nax on Daiyu just 10 years after the Clone Wars was over. Although he physically was probably just in his late teens or early 20s, Nax's biological clock, however, is closer to 40 years, which, isn't too old to fight. A lot of military forces have older people in combat positions. It's not uncommon. But still, Nax was starting to show some signs of aging. By the time the Battle of Yavin occurs, there were actually very few clones left in the 501st Battalion, and that's because most of them by that time would be in their late 50s or early 60s. Ultimately, no amount of grit or wisdom can overcome those achy bones and weak knees in the morning. Unless maybe you're fighting in a fixed position as a part of a rear guard because you don't want to die in a nursing home. You want to go out like a man on the battlefield. But the amazing thing is, even during A New Hope, you still had a few clones running around in the 501st. For instance, you remember Foot Patrol 7, right? A small detachment of Vader's fists sent on Tatooine to look for those pesky droids. Well, one of those stormtroopers, one of the enlisted men, goes by the name Crag. And he's an original clone trooper, believe it or not. So there you have it, guys. That is the story of the 501st Battalion turning into the 501st Legion. You know, in a lot of ways, I don't feel like these two units are the same at all. I mean, they were just completely decimated by the end of the Clone Wars, which is either a good thing or a bad thing, depending on who you are. But yeah, I hope you enjoyed today's video. Don't forget to subscribe, hit that notification button down below so you don't miss out on the rest for awesome content. As usual, my name is Alan, reminding you that my allegiance is to the Republic, to democracy. I'll see you next time.